It is. Welcome, Ladybugs and Yellow Jackets, to this week's episode of Author Reads here on Fae Productions. I am your host, Fairy Princess Lolly, and before we jump into the show today, I would like to get our regular obligatory things out of the way. First, please like, subscribe, and keeping in theme with today's reading that we're going to hear, bite the bell. So we do something new to our bell every show. Today we're going to bite it. If that doesn't give you an indication about what we're going to hear, I don't know what might. So, second, also, I wanted to remind everybody that it is this weekend. I've been up working all morning, and as soon as we're done with the show, I get to go right back to preparing for our Beltane Boffers and Tea that we are having tomorrow. We will be gathering at Monarch Sculpture Park in Olympia for some sword swinging boffer practice, and then also a little goblin fruit hunt, and then on Sunday, May 2nd, we will be down at the Shire Bar and Bistro in Chehalis for our Fairy High Tea. So I would like to invite anybody who wants to come and join us. The park is just outside, so please remember to still bring your masks, etc., or your Vax card if you have that, because here in Washington, they have just opened up that if you have your Vax card, you no longer need to wear your mask. So bring that if you have it. And also, a shout out to today's show sponsor, which is Longship Luxury Goods. And Longship Luxury Goods has the accessories that you need for your Viking persona: belts, pouches, clothing, Viking long coats, and actually they've got some fairy coats, because I got like a little sneak preview of those a couple days ago. Mugs, cups, and basically fantasy and historically inspired wares and clothing lines. So they always have free shipping with the magic word imagine. So if you order from them online, use that word. And of course, let them know where you heard about them from. Longship Luxury Goods. Their information is in the ticker and in the low bar. Please check them out. Support our vendors. And with that said, then that brings us officially here to our guest author today, who is in the mundane normie realm known as Joshua Miller, but in the realm of amazing, awesome fantasy people and Amtgard. He is known as Baelnorn. So welcome, Baelnorn, to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, please, if you will, introduce yourself to the audience and give a shout out to your kingdom if you want, and let's hear a little bit about you.
I'm Bill Norn. I play in a game called Amtgard, and my kingdom is Kingdom of Blackspire. It's in the Oregon area.
Woo!
Um, I've been writing since I was a kid, and I just grew up loving it, and so I have. Hello, sorry, reading chat. Shouldn't do that.
That's okay. I do it too.
I'm also streaming on Twitch, so I'm used to like checking chat and talking with the chat. So it's a little bit different for me, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And I really had fun, actually, to like give the shout out there. You do have a Twitch channel, and I had fun being on your Twitch stream. Was it last Friday, I think, wasn't
Yeah, I
it?
think, yeah.
Because it was right after the show that I had done, and then I got the notification. I was like, I'm going to go over there, see what's going on. And by the way, you people who are on Facebook, I'm putting a link here into the chat really quick. StreamYard.com/Facebook. Go there, give StreamYard permissions to see your Facebook name. Otherwise, this is how you appear. You are a Facebook user that's like, yeah, Baelnorn, but we don't know who you are because you have no name yet. So you have to go name yourself. But yeah, no, I super had fun on your Twitch channel, hanging out while you were taste testing some brews and some pub fare with your friends, who I did not get to see. So they were the mysterious voices behind the camera. But
Yeah, they required an appearance fee, and I wasn't willing to pay them.
an
So,
appearance fee. Hold on. Now, hey, Taryn, how are you? All right. Yay, Taryn is one of our people. So it's nice to
nice.
see you. Also an Amtgard person as well. it one of those people that you were eating with though was, oh man, I have a fuzz in my eye, was the gopher, if I recall correctly, right? The low man on
Oh,
the totem pole.
yeah, like I tried to go get beers a couple times, and like, nah, nah, I'll go get it, I'll go get it. So I didn't have to get up in the middle of the stream. So they
But
chose to do that. It was a nice thing.
low man on the totem pole charges an appearance fee? Man, what do these guys want?
I'm not sure. They wouldn't tell me.
No, I think that if they get bested in a battle, that they should have to appear for free. I think there should be a challenge that happens here.
I think that's a good idea. Should do
Right?
that.
We could see their mysterious faces. It'll be a reveal. So tell us a little bit, if you will, about your actual writing. You say you've been writing since you were a little kid, and how did you get started in that? What's like the earliest writing you can remember that kind of got you started?
Yeah, so there is a teacher called Mrs. Niebaki, and it was a middle school. I think it was sixth grade, and she was really encouraging. And I wrote a story. I don't remember what it was. I mean, it was short, and just some pictures and several pages worth of a couple sentences here and there. But she was really supportive, and that was my earliest memory of writing because of her support and encouragement, and they kind of kept me going for a long time. So
And you don't remember your very first
I
story?
I don't. I remember
I
some of my high school stuff, but no, that's a little too early.
so have you ever gone back and reread it, or do you just like look back on it and you're like, oh man, what was I doing? I was such a teenager.
Well, sadly, I don't have anything from like middle school that I can recall through the papers I looked, but I still have some stuff from high school.
Yeah.
And for a while, I got into the habit of every year I'd go back and revisit all the stuff I wrote, which I should go back and do. I haven't done in the last 5 years, but it's a fun journey down your own memory lane and stuff like that. There's also a lot of stories I lost on my computer, but back in high school, it was almost all handwritten. So
I think you are a brave man to do this because, one of the things they say, of course, in the YouTube realms is that, and I don't know if it's true of Twitch, but is that you never go back and look at your old videos because you do from a year ago and you're like, oh man, my video production has got so much better. What was I thinking back then? Like my sound is terrible, my lighting's terrible, my whatevers are terrible. And the same thing though, kind of with writing, at least for me, I do go back and also read stuff, but there are times when I'm like, oh man, I wish I hadn't come back and read this particular thing. So I think you're a
yeah.
brave man for doing that.
Well, I've learned through doing that. Basically I've seen my growth, which is nice. But I've also like found stories like I can write that better now. I'm going to take the story idea I had and I'm just going to modernize it or
Oh,
something
that's a
like
good
that.
idea. Yeah,
And
that's a good way of looking at it.
with Twitch, like I hate my voice, like a lot of people do. So I haven't gone back and looked. Well, not a lot of. I don't know.
You hate the sound of your own, but your voice
I
actually
do.
sounds quite nice.
Oh well, thank you.
You're
Just
welcome.
I just don't like going back and looking at it, but I had to force myself to, and I'm trying to learn. Like for my reading, I learned good learning points, and so going back and looking at my videos and stuff, I'm trying to refocus and look at the positives and what I can learn from it, rather than what I don't like about it.
Sort of like
So
watching your football game after the game and analyzing it for where improvements could be made.
yeah,
So,
it's hard though.
yeah, I think that I think I can definitely sympathize with that because when I do recordings, like if I'm reading books out loud and I do audio recordings, it's easy to go back when I'm editing my reading, but once it's done and up, going back and listening to myself, I feel awkward about it, right? Even though it's after I've edited it and everything. But so tell me a little bit about what genre or genres you write, and I mean, has that changed and you've found your favorite, or have you always been writing the same thing?
Um, I've almost it's always been fantasy based. I've other than academic writing, I've only done uh, fiction writing or nonfiction or infrequently. So it's almost been fantasy. But in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, it's kind of morphed into looking at urban fantasy.
Yes.
And So, and it's been an interesting change because some time periods it's harder to change and think about it than other times in phases of my life. So yeah.
But so urban fantasy is kind of the direction you are going then,
Uh,
like from where you're at now.
yes, I have a rough draft of a fantasy novel I wrote. I don't know if it'll ever get published. I
Hey,
just
you can
lost
always
steam,
self-publish.
but
That's what it's about these
yeah.
days.
But that was, and then after that, I kind of just switched to urban fantasy. That was kind of like my last big push in fantasy, and then I just had more ideas with urban fantasy and combining fantasy realms into urban fantasy. Is
Hmm.
something that I'm going to explore in the future.
That
Um,
sounds fascinating. I had a question that I totally was going to ask related to the urban fantasy thing, and then I got to listening to you, and now it totally has. Oh yeah, okay, I remember. So you have won an award in Amtgard for at least something that you've written. What was
oh.
that thing? Will you tell me about that a little bit?
Yes, it was a short story called Destiny, and it's this child that's having a dream, and you go through the dream, and then he wakes up. And so it was in Amtgard. There's not a lot of long form writing contests. Usually, you're limited to like 5 pages or something like that. So it was a rare chance to actually show us a larger work, and
Hmm.
there were probably about 6 or 7 other entrants in the this contest, and I end up winning first place.
Nice. Well,
Yeah,
congratulations on
thanks.
that. That sounds that sounds wonderful.
It was it was a fun experience. I don't get to do that very often, so.
Yeah, it's all about stick jockeying out there, right? So,
Uh, on the day to day field, quite frequently, yes, but there is a good arts and science scene too. It's one of the pillars of the community.
arts and science. How does science factor into fantasy realm? I'm curious.
Well, for Amtgard, there's like you can build trebuchets and like
Ah,
stuff that's more science based and
engineering.
yeah, engineering projects, and some people
Storm
really
the
get into
castle.
it. So,
Yeah, no, I can understand the appeal of a trebuchet. We had one a few years ago for Fairy Blossom Festival, and it was it was an 850 pound approximately counterweight, and it could
oh
launch.
well,
Yeah, it was enormous. It was beautiful. It was able to launch like a cantaloupe or a honeydew melon 300 yards.
oh
They just
wow.
smashed. It was wonderful. Yes, that was great. So I didn't know that that was actually. So then you this like ups your rank then in those fields or art categories.
Oh yes, so there's an award system like 1 to 10, then masterhood.
Mm,
So there's different categories like art, making clothing, fighting is one of the categories, and so you get awards based on your skill. And so the
gotcha.
higher or the more skilled you become, the higher level award it is. I think I got a 7 out of 10 for
Ooh,
the short story.
well, that's
So
pretty good.
yeah, and
Go ahead.
oh no, it's nothing.
Oh, so I was instructed. So on Fey News, there was at the end of the show, I mentioned that you were going to be here on Friday. Fey News is our Wednesday segment. And one of the things that we discussed on Fey News was the Josh War. And I was
Oh,
instructed to ask you whether or not you recognize the newly anointed King Josh, rightful owner of the name, or if you are on the anarch rebel side.
it's too wholesome not to support him. I'm sorry. Um, I was fully prepared to not to support the new king, but then I saw who won and who is the new king, and I was like, he can have it. He's worthy, Josh. He can,
A worthy Josh.
yeah.
All right. Well, for all of you who told me to ask, there is your answer about the Josh War. So tell us a little bit, if you will, about today's story, what you're going to read to us, and give us a little bit of context about the world that we're about to be stepping into with you.
Okay, so this particular story is set in 1967, and I believe Chicago. At least that's what I have in my notes. I didn't actually. I had some key things in there, little hints about the time period, but I don't flat out say what city it is in the actual story. I don't
It's
think.
2 years before Woodstock and the moon landing, right? Wasn't the moon landing in 1969?
I think so. I hope so. I'm a historian. I should know this. I studied Japan though, so. So it's set in a larger world that I call the Illusions of Mist world. I have a novel that I've been writing that I've been posting rough drafts of, and it uses some of the characters from that, but they have a different name, so it's a surprise when they pop up. But it's a world where magic existed at one point, and magic flows in and out. So some time periods have more magic than other time periods, and right now it's a time period where there isn't too much magic. This short story doesn't actually specifically talk about the flow of magic, but it's a big component to the world that this story is set in.
So it's almost like moon phases or something, like the magic sort of waxes and wanes.
Yeah. And the main character is immortal, and he encounters a vampire eventually, and that's kind of part of the reading that goes into it. And in the story, he's faced with choices that he has to make in the title Dark Choices, and they're I wouldn't call them happy choices, but he has to make them.
That sounds like it can be a tough thing. So I'm excited to hear what you've got for us today. And so, everybody out there, for those of you who are new joining us, here is how the next segment of the show works. I will give the entire screen over to Baelnorn, who will then ply us with his trade, reading from his short story. And while he's doing that, I'll be on mute here in the background with you guys in the comments, taking questions. When he is done reading, then we will come back together and we will ask him all of the questions from you guys out there in the audience. And when we are done with that, then it will be time to do our drawing for an ebook copy of the story today. So are you ready to read?
Oh yeah, I'm ready.
All right. I will go ahead and give you the whole screen, sir. There you are. Oh, what is that little blue cute thing in your background?
Oh, that is a slime from the Dragon Quest series of video games. I got that from a claw machine in a town near Tokyo on my trip to Japan.
That is that must have been an enormous claw machine. Look at the size of that thing.
It was pretty big, but it's also really soft and squishy. So the claw didn't have to be too big.
And you have a little gnome right there too. I see your little gnome guy.
He went to Europe with me, and I took pictures, and he has a whole
Roman gnome
Facebook page. Yeah. So his name's Nomi. It wasn't very inventive. Yeah.
Got your gnomies with you. All right. I'm putting myself on mute, and the show is yours, sir.
All right, thank you. Christopher, a man in his late teens, had his brown book satchel slung over his shoulder as he was walking home from the library. It was late fall, and despite it being dinner time, the sun was already down. The street was only slightly lit up from the new streetlights. He wore a deep red windbreaker to keep out the colder than usual air, the same cold that was keeping the street empty of people. The night was silent, that is until Christopher was passing an alley and heard the sounds of a struggle. He stopped and peered down the alleyway. It was made up of a 4-story building on one side and a 5-story building on the other. It took a few moments for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. He could just make out that there were 3 white men in their mid-30s manhandling a black woman. 2 of them were holding the woman against the wall while the leader was talking to the woman up close. Christopher's face hardened as he realized what was happening. He quietly put down his satchel and snuck into the alleyway. He moved silently up to the group, so much so that the leader, who was about to strike the woman, was taken aback as Christopher said, "Let her go." The man slightly jumped and faced Christopher and said laughingly, "Or what?" Christopher narrowed his eyes. "Or I'll make you." The man stopped laughing and pulled out a switchblade. "Get out of here, or I'll—" Before the man could finish what he was saying, Christopher kicked him in the groin, throat punched him, and did a wheel kick and sent the man flying unconscious to the ground. He then turned his attention to the two men holding the woman against the wall. All three of them looked at him with surprise. "Let her go." At Christopher's words, the men came out of the momentary shock. They both shoved the woman against Christopher and ran down the alleyway away from him. Christopher caught the woman and looked down into her eyes, his face softening. "You're safe now." The woman stared into his eyes as her own eyes began to fill with tears. She began to cry on his shoulder. After a few moments, they began to walk out of the alley with her leaning on him. Once they were back on the streets, she thanked them, and they parted ways. She walked down the street in the opposite direction he was going. Before continuing home, he bent over to pick up his book satchel. After straightening up, he shivered slightly. Not from the cold, it was the oddest feeling. He looked back down the alleyway, but there was nothing there, not even the man he had knocked out. He shrugged, thinking to himself he must have woken up and walked away. It continued as he walked home. Draven looked down the alleyway from atop a 4-story building. In the alleyway there was a struggle. 3 men were attacking a woman. They had her up against the wall. He sighed as he prepared to jump down. "Is this really the best I could find tonight?" he thought to himself. He was about to jump down as he saw a young man enter the alley. He looked several years younger than the men attacking the woman. Draven thought the young man was moving surprisingly silent towards the attackers, for a human. Draven watched as the man approached. The man in the red jacket took down one opponent in such a way that Draven was mildly impressed. He was disappointed the young man didn't give the others the same treatment. As the man began to escort the woman out of the alleyway, Draven dropped down the 4 stories as silently as a feather to the alley floor. He reached down and picked up the ruffian by the neck and held him up at eye level and shook his head. Pathetic. He looked back down the alleyway as the man in the red jacket was straightening back up from picking up his book satchel. Draven jumped back up to where he had stood on the roof just as smoothly as he had dropped. However, this time he carried the body of the young ruffian in one hand. He watched from above as the other man looked quizzically down the alleyway before continuing down the street. Draven raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Did he sense me? Draven looked back to the body in his hand. He brought it closer, opening his mouth and sunk his teeth into the young man's neck. He didn't stop drinking till the body was drained of its life-giving essence. He removed his teeth from the lifeless corpse. He slightly bit the inside of his lips. Using the blood on his tongue, he licked the wounds, causing them to heal. He then dropped the body off the side of the building in an attempt to make it look like he had fallen over the edge of the building. Draven then jumped to the next building and looked down the street for the young man. He caught sight of him and jumped from rooftop to rooftop following him. Eventually the young man entered a 3-story townhouse. Draven spent the rest of the evening sitting on the roof and listening into the home. Eventually the family went to bed. By the end of the evening, he had learned that the boy was going to a local college and lived in his parents' home. He also learned the boy's name was Christopher, and he had a large family with several older brothers, all who had moved out. Tomorrow he was going to spend the day at school and meet his uncle for lunch between classes. After everyone had gone to bed, Draven sat on the rooftop a bit longer thinking. There is something about this Christopher. He intrigues me. Something about the way he fights. Then there was that moment where I was sure he could sense me. Exceedingly rare, very unexpected. Draven looked over the night scene. The lights were cluttering up the view, the buildings were breaking the wind up in unnatural patterns, and the smell of civilization clung to the air. It is different throughout the centuries, but there was always a familiar scent when it came to civilizations. It had been a long time since he had found any human even mildly interesting. He nodded as he made up his mind. I'll follow him tomorrow and see how interesting this Christopher person might be. He jumped down off the roof and walked back to his hotel. After all, he had school tomorrow. It was a crisp fall day. The ground was covered in golden brown fallen leaves. Despite the cool air, the sun beamed down, keeping Christopher warm, with the help of his jacket, of course. Christopher was not surprised his uncle would choose to eat on a patio. He set his book satchel down next to his chair and took a seat. It wasn't long before his Uncle Oliver joined him at the table. His uncle was older than him, but he wasn't sure by how much. He always thought he looked like he was in his 20s, but he must be in his early 30s. He wasn't his real uncle, of course. He was just a family friend. He was close enough to the family that he was just always Uncle Oliver. His earliest memories of his uncle were in first grade when he started training him in martial arts. As his uncle sat down, Christopher greeted him. "Hello, Uncle Oliver." Oliver scooted his chair towards the table as he spoke. "Christopher, thanks for joining me for lunch. How was your morning?" "It was okay, Uncle. I'm not a fan of world history, though. I'm not even sure why you insisted on me taking liberal arts classes. I don't like book studying. I'm more physical than that." His uncle nodded. "You may not like studying, but you're good at it. I understand you don't like it, but it's necessary." Christopher slumped back in his chair and half-heartedly picked up his menu. "I know, you and my parents want me to do this, but it doesn't feel right. I'd rather pursue my fighting. That's the one thing I do enjoy studying." Oliver sighed. "I know, and you're good at fighting, but that's not all there is in the world. It's important to learn about the past, to learn about other cultures. It gives you insight into how other people think and behave. It helps you decide on what kind of person you would like to become. You're young, you're only 18, you have a whole life ahead of you. This is only your first term. You'll get used to the workload." Christopher put down his menu. "It's not the workload, Uncle. I can cope with the extra work. I just sit in class, and I don't want to be there. It puts me on edge. My mind is full of developing myself to be the best fighter. I want to get into boxing. I know you don't want me to, but it's something I've always wanted to do." Oliver sighed. "I know, but you have time. You're still young. Tell you what, we will continue your training. If after college you still want to try your hand at boxing, you can." Christopher perked up slightly. "Are you serious, Uncle? What about my parents?" Oliver waved off Christopher's concerns. "I'll talk to your parents. They might not be happy, but they will come around. In the meantime, focus on your work. I'll take care of your parents. Just make sure you get good grades. If you don't, I will stop training you." Christopher was a bit surprised. He wanted his uncle to keep training him. He had been training him since the age of 10. He got a serious look on his face and nodded. "Of course, Uncle. I'll do my best." The waitress approached the table, smiling. "Have you two decided on what you like?" Christopher smiled and looked up at the waitress. "Yes, I'd like a turkey club and a glass of orange juice." The waitress wrote down his order and looked over at Oliver. "What about you, dear?" Oliver looked up at the waitress. "I'll take a water and a meatloaf with mashed potatoes." She wrote down his order and looked back up. "Sounds wonderful. I'll get them to start on it right away." She put her order book in her apron pocket and walked away. Oliver leaned forward and half whispered to Christopher, like he was sharing a secret. "I might even consider becoming your coach and managing you too, if you decide to go with boxing after college." Christopher was beaming. "For real, Uncle? You would do that?" Oliver nodded. "Of course, you're my favorite nephew. I don't think you should do it, but if you do, I want to be there to support you and make sure no one takes advantage of you." Christopher began to speak. "Thank you, Uncle. I really appreciate—" but stopped as Oliver stood up abruptly. Oliver moved his head from right to left, scanning the courtyard, ignoring Christopher. Christopher looked up at his uncle. "Is something wrong, Uncle?" Oliver continued his scanning of the crowd. He had a look of concentration on his face. As quickly as he changed back. He looked down at his nephew. The stony look on his face changed, and the warm smile returned. "No, nothing is wrong. It's nothing. I thought... No, it doesn't matter." He sat back down and changed the topic. "Did you hear? There was a murder near your house last night. A man named Frank Owens." "No, Uncle, I didn't." His uncle nodded. "It was in an alley a few minutes' walk from your house." Christopher tensed up, thinking back to his fight. "I did punch him in the throat. Was it too hard? Didn't he walk away?" He asked his uncle, "Did they say how he died?" Oliver shook his head. "No, they didn't say how the man died, just that he was found in the alleyway dead." Christopher shifted slightly in his seat. "Uncle, something happened last night." Oliver raised an eyebrow and let Christopher continue. Last night I got into a fight." He paused a moment, thinking that Oliver was going to react. He had always been taught to use his martial arts only in self-defense. To his surprise, Oliver didn't react, and Christopher continued. "There were these 3 men, and they were harassing this woman. It looked like they were about to rape her. I couldn't let them do that. I attacked the leader, and he went unconscious, and the other 2 ran. I left the man in the alley. I thought he got back up and walked away, but it was dark. Maybe he was still there." Christopher paused. "Uncle? Did I kill a man?" Oliver leaned in and spoke at a near whisper. He had a serious look in his eyes. I don't know, but I will find out. Don't tell anyone else about this. Just go about like nothing happened. You did the right thing no matter what. Remember that. He leaned back, the concerned look on his face disappearing. Now, let's not speak of this again. Don't you worry. Christopher looked at his uncle suspiciously. He didn't understand why his uncle was so calm. If I killed someone, how could he take care of it? I've always trusted my uncle, but if it's true and I killed someone, how can I live with myself? The food arrived. It looked fresh, but for some reason Christopher no longer had much of an appetite. Draven got up early to make sure he had the right clothing to blend in on campus. Draven tried to dress up like a college youth, but he had admitted to himself that he was not with the times. Yet he managed to do a pretty good job. He even went out and bought a book bag and put some books in it to complete the disguise. He had been following Christopher ever since he left for school. Nothing all that unique happened. He had followed Christopher all morning, including to 2 classes. Draven hadn't gone into the classroom himself. He sat in the alleyway and was able to hear the classroom well enough. The first class, they were discussing The Metamorphosis by Kefka. Draven sat on a bench around the corner from the room's front door. He had never had much use for academia, but he did pick up an affinity for books over the years. There was always something new to read. He had heard of Kefka, but was still working on finishing books from centuries before the man was even born. Still, he found himself skipping ahead in his reading. In reading modern books from time to time, he felt it helped him assimilate into cultures better. The second class Draven followed Christopher to was his history course. They were discussing the 30 Years' War in Europe. Based on the details they mentioned, Draven was fairly sure he took part in that conflict. It always amused him to hear about events from a mortal's perspective. In both classes, Draven couldn't see what Christopher was doing, but he never heard him speak. Between classes, Christopher sat in the courtyard and read his history book. After his classes, Draven followed Christopher to a little cafe near campus. In fact, it was right next to one of the school's courtyards. Christopher took a seat at an empty table. Draven leaned up against a tree that was a good distance away from Christopher. He was in such a spot that he could still easily see and hear him. Draven took out one of the books he was carrying around, a new novel called The Black Cauldron, with the intention to use it as cover to watch Christopher. It wasn't long before the uncle came and sat at the table. Seeing the uncle, Draven's first instinct was to escape. He knew the man. It was Theron, the last person he expected to see. He hadn't seen him in over 300 years, and he wasn't sure he wanted to see him now. Interesting people, this boy knows. He had fought off his first instinct and continued to watch and listen. Apparently, Theron sees something in this boy that might explain a few things. Seems the boy doesn't just know how to fight, but also lives for fighting. Their conversation was broken up by the waitress who came and took their order. They then continued talking. Suddenly, the uncle stood up, and Draven went deadly still. Can he sense me? I've overstayed my welcome. Draven quickly took a step backwards behind the tree and melded into the shadows and disappeared. Draven stepped out of the shadows of his hotel room. I hope he didn't see me. I should never have stayed as long as I did. This is getting interesting. It was a few days later in the evening when Christopher was walking home through a park. He had stayed late again, working with a group from his history class. It was boring and tedious, but he was going to do his best. He wanted to make his family proud and, of course, make sure his uncle would follow through with helping him in starting his boxing career. Still, he could not help feel a sense of guilt and dread over the unknown fate of the man in the alley. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had taken a life. He played the moment over and over again in his mind. He could have gone for a less sensitive area than his windpipe. He knew why his uncle always taught him to avoid fighting. You never know what is going to happen. The night air was crisp. The recent rain brought a freshness to the air. The clouds were broken up, and you could periodically see the half-moon that hung in the air. Christopher was walking along the path that took him by the bathrooms. He was deep in his own thoughts when the two men who he had last seen in the alley a few days ago, came out from behind the bathrooms. He was holding a stick in his hand, and the other had a chain wrapped around his right hand. They moved onto the path, blocking Christopher. Christopher heard movement from behind him and glanced back. 3 other men walked from behind the bathroom, surrounding him. One of them carried a bat. another carried a knife, and the third person was wearing brass knuckles on his hand. Christopher looked back at the man with the stick standing in front of him and spoke. You killed Frank or some woman. Christopher casually unslung his satchel. I didn't kill anyone. I stopped Frank and you from raping that woman. Christopher had never had to fight more than one person before, but he had been practicing this for nearly half of his life. He needed to separate the group more and fight as few of them as at one time as possible. He decided he would stop the one in front of him with the stick, then turn them to the man with the chain. If he were lucky, he would be able to break from the pack and run away. If he were too slow, the three behind him would be able to attack him. The man with the stick growled as he spoke. Bullshit. You killed him. The cops wouldn't have listened to us, but we knew you, and the man grunted as the satchel that Christopher was carrying was launched into his chest. The man stumbled backwards. Christopher ran forward, pushing the man back a few steps further. He grabbed the wrist of the man holding the stick, twisted it, and made him drop it. Christopher grabbed the stick mid-air as it fell. The man swung with his left hand, but Christopher sidestepped. Christopher then used the stick to hit the man in the stomach, knocking the air out of him. He then punched the man in the jaw with his other hand, and the man crumpled to the ground unconscious. As Christopher turned to face the man with chain, he was punched on the side of the face above the right eye from the hand wrapped in the chain. He took a half step back at the impact. The momentary shock of metal hitting his face quickly passed. He recovered just in time. The man started to take another swing. Christopher used his stick to bash the man's arm and move in. Christopher grabbed the man, using the stick as leverage, fell backwards and threw the man behind him onto the ground. Christopher quickly followed that up by smashing his fist into the man's head, incapacitating him. Christopher expected that the other three people had taken the time to move in where he was momentarily dazed. He quickly got to his feet and glanced back. He hoped he had enough space between him and the other three so that he could run away. Christopher did not expect to see what he saw. While the adrenaline was still running through his veins, he was shocked out of the momentary urgency he had a moment ago. Standing there over the bodies of the three people was one man. He stood just at the edge of the light that was being put out by the street lamp. He was standing perfectly still in a long brown trench coat. As the wind blew, his black hair moved and his trench coat flapped. In the moments that passed, a few red leaves fell off the nearby trees, streaking across the scene. The man broke the silence first. You fight with precision, but there is room for improvement. Your Uncle Oliver has taught you well. Christopher was grateful for the man's help, but he still felt on edge, and it wasn't just adrenaline. The man gave off an aura unlike anyone else. He had met few people who had this presence this man had. Oliver was one of them. His uncle usually made him feel like he was safe, but sometimes he got the impression that he unnerved other people. It wasn't as simple as that, though. There was a visceral quality to the feeling when it came to his uncle and this man. It wasn't just raw charisma. This character had a similar presence, but he didn't feel safe. He felt like he should run, but he held his ground. Thank you for helping me, but how do you know Uncle Oliver, and how do you know he taught me? The man smiled ever so slightly. I've known the man you know as Oliver for a long time. If you want to know how I know it, that's a tale for him to tell. I knew he taught you because I could see it in the way that you fought. It's subtle, but I can see his hand in your teaching. Christopher ignored the fact that this person didn't answer his question and moved the conversation on. Thank you for helping me. I wasn't sure I was going to make it out alive. What's your name so I can thank you properly? My name is Draven. Christopher was careful not to let the surprise over the unusual name show on his face. He walked towards Draven and extended his hand. Draven extended his own, and they shook as Christopher spoke. Thank you, Draven. You may have saved my life. Draven's hand was cold to the touch and very rigid. His grasp was very firm. It felt like rock. Despite acting normal, Christopher was very uneasy. He still felt like running. He wanted to get this interaction over with as fast as he could. If there is anything I can do for you, let me know. It is late, though, and I should be getting along. Draven smiled, and it made Christopher feel like escaping. I'm sure I'll be able to find you if I decide to collect on that debt. Give Oliver my best. Christopher said, "Of course," and turned around, dropped the stick, and picked up his book satchel. He headed towards home once again. He did his best to maintain a casual walking pace, but as soon as he turned a corner in the trail, he took off running and didn't stop till he got home. I think that was about 25 minutes.
It is 2:45. So, yeah, about 20 minutes, I think. So that's it, right on time. I was getting some serious Alfred vibes actually from Uncle Oliver, right?
I
But
can't actually hear you for some
oh
reason.
no, you can't. What? No, I'm right here. Ah. How about now? No?
It's because my headphones died.
Oh, well, that would do it.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Looks like you're plugging it in, so are
Now
you
they work.
back?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Hey. No, that's okay. Yeah, I was definitely getting, not initially, but by the end of it, I was like, man, Uncle Oliver, I'm getting some Alfred vibes, right? from that guy. So we do have some questions out there from the audience, and if you guys have any while I'm asking the current questions, if they come to mind or whatever, feel free to just continue to add them to the chat. Let me scroll back here for a minute and find. So the first one, I don't know how it is necessarily related, but I'll ask it. It's from Blizzix on Twitch, which was, have you read Invincible? And I assume if you have and you know what Invincible is about, then you know how this might relate to your writing.
I have not read Invincible, so I'm not sure how it would relate to my writing, and I'm not sure I've heard of it. So,
what is it? What is Invincible? I do not know what it is. I'm sorry. Uh-oh, can you not hear me again?
I can hear you.
Oh.
Like, I don't know what Invincible is.
Oh, you don't even know. I thought you said you
I don't
had
even
heard of it.
Oh no, I haven't even heard of it. Sorry.
Oh, even heard of it. Okay, I'm sorry. Totally
I
misunderstood.
thought for a second I thought you were asking chat.
Oh yeah, no. Well, I mean, if Blizzix is still out there, what is Invincible? Do tell, elucidate, if you will. All right. The next question is from Newt, which is: do you take your inspiration for either story or characters from your experiences in any of the LARPs that you participate?
Not this project, not this world. But I write stuff for my LARP, and so I do take some inspiration for some of the writing that I've done for my LARP from the structure of the LARP and stuff like that. But my LARP is very light roleplay. We don't have like a set world that we play in, so it's not like I had story elements to draw from there, other than improvising with other people and maybe creating interesting scenarios.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can immortalize them in writing.
Yeah.
As it were. I'm speaking of, though, other worlds. I'm curious, what is different about, like, building on that a little bit, what is different about your vampire world versus other, pre-established vampire settings?
I think the vampires are. I took more of a Bram Stoker approach, but I added some other of my own personal elements to them. Just they have more powers than like the Bram Stoker's Dracula, but they don't have necessarily the weaknesses that some of the other tropes have. So they can walk in the daylight, but they're a little bit weaker, which I don't see very often in my experience with modern vampires. So I was kind of taking it back a little bit to something a little bit older, and maybe I'm incorporating other legends of other undead that may be vampire-like, but are not necessarily considered vampires specifically. So I'm exploring other lore to build them up, I guess.
And so speaking of other lore then, and you recently, like you said earlier on the show, that you have been to Japan. Do you incorporate maybe Japanese folklore with regards to, do they, vampires that are, Eastern folklore, I guess?
I haven't done that in my writing yet, but it's definitely something that's on my mind. The novel that I'm writing, the setting does eventually interact with Japanese vampires. So in organizations, so a lot of my history from learning Japanese, because I know a lot about modern Japanese,
Mm-hmm.
it goes into some of their backgrounds and stuff like that that inform how they act. And I wouldn't say I'm not a Japanese expert whatsoever, but I have a decent amount of knowledge about their culture and stuff like that. So Shintoism will definitely play a role to some regard, in some regard, and also their different social structures
Mm-hmm.
play a role in how those vampires and their societies will react to the Western
Interesting.
vampires.
That's pretty cool. I think that's kind of a unique, a unique addition, I guess, mostly Western writing for Western people. So it's kind of cool to have that culture thrown in there. Um, Here we have, has your study of history affected your storytelling?
Absolutely, especially with regards to backgrounds for characters, because I have studied a lot about how cultures develop and how societies interact with each other, what are important things in history. And luckily, went to school in a time period where it's a transition to more cultural history. So it's not just like this great person did this great thing and that's history. So I get more of a experience of like what did the townspeople do? How are the towns structured? Trade routes. How did goods move from one location to another location? So I think it's given me a good breadth of information to pull from. It's hard for me to call a specific thing that I learned that I specifically took, but it's all just kind of encompassed my approach and how I develop backgrounds.
Sorry, I put myself on mute because
Oh,
I was
okay.
typing really quick and I type like firecrackers, like pow, 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 pow. So I mute myself. And I was gonna say that makes sense. So it's always interesting to hear how people's historical studies have affected or influenced their various writings. Um, so we have a question from Alicia out here, and I don't actually know what this is in reference to exactly. So maybe you do, but why mention metamorphosis if your own story is not written in the method of absurdity? I don't understand what that question means. Do you?
Um, I understand what the question is getting at. Basically, I put it in there because it was a story that I remember from a literature class. There was no deeper meaning. I wasn't using any of the like specific writing forms that literature takes.
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry.
Just because it was a thing, one of the things that you remembered from back in the day.
Yeah,
Okay,
pretty much.
that makes sense. Okay, so before I get to the last question that I see out there, at least for the nonce, I'm gonna tell everybody while he is answering the last question, this is the time, you guys, put your names into the comment section now. If you would like your name to be put onto the wheel of win for the drawing. So when we are done with this last question, then we will do the drawing for the free ebook. And now is the time to put your name in the comments. The last question that I see here is from Newt. Who are your favorite authors to read?
So lately, I haven't been reading very much, but so I've gone back to a lot of the things that I read back in high school or grade school because I just love getting adult fiction. Honestly,
Mhm.
I like other fiction too, but Suzanne Cooper, in I really liked her. She did the Forest Chronicles. No, sorry, I like the Forest Chronicles. That was not Susan Cooper. Susan Cooper was um. Oh my goodness, I read this every couple years, and I forgot the name. I'm terrible at this. Oh, I'm drawing a blank. I apologize. But more modern authors, the
The
Mistborn
Lost
trilogy.
Land? Is that who?
No, the Rising of the Dark or the Dark is Rising sequence. The Dark is
Oh yeah,
Rising
The
sequence.
Dark is Rising. Okay.
Yeah. But the more modern authors, the Mistborn trilogy. He finished,
Oh, yeah.
and that was
It's
probably one of
Brandon
my more
Sanderson, right?
Sanderson. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. And I really loved how he finished the Wheel of Time series. That was a really
And
great
that was
experience.
originally Robert Jordan, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's probably my one all-time favorite modern series is probably the Wheel of Time, if it's even considered modern anymore. But I loved his work there, and so then I went and read the Mistborn trilogy, and the Mistborn trilogy was just, I was so in awe, so in awe. Like, if I could write like that, I don't even imagine I could write like that. But it's really good. So he's
No,
a really good
never
author.
say it. Never say it. You can
Ne-
you can do it. You can do it. Where there's a will, there's a way, as they say. I've only ever read one Brandon Sanderson book, and I can't remember what it was that made me pick it up. Maybe I just read it and I thought the premise was unique. It was called The Rhythmist, and I think it's maybe more young adult fantasy than it was hot, regular or high fantasy or sci-fi fantasy. I'm not sure. Yes, but I loved it. The Everything about it was so unique and creative, and I guess I'm just like, come on, man, it's been years. Can we have number two? Are you pulling a J.R.R. Martin, a J.R. Martin on us? so, uh, so yeah, okay. So I see. Let's see. Newt, right now you're the only person who's getting the extra uh name. If you guys, now is the time I'm going to share to you our wheel, because now is the time that we basically do our drawing. And I was kind of curious, what is it, why, for somebody who likes fantasy so much, why did you choose to write about vampires?
because usually I always see it as like romanticized, and I like more of. I guess I write more of the action-ish style.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could say, and so I just kind of wanted to like take a and kind of like just change it around a little bit and make it more action orientated, kind of a vampire story opposed to a romantic story. Also, I like that fantasy of immortality and how that applies and how characters develop through immortality and the uniqueness that can offer a story.
That makes sense. And actually, action is that is kind of a unique approach as well, because a lot of times people, they say things like, oh, I want it to be darker, or, oh, I want it to be more classic, historical, true to whatever. So you don't get a lot of the super action vampire, right?
Yeah, not too
Little
much.
Lost Boys, maybe. I don't know. They're not even really all that action. I mean, they're out there causing trouble, but okay.
Yeah.
So with that said, then here is our long list. I'm going to check one more time here. Okay. Here's our long list of people going in. So we will put it on the wheel and hit the button. Pow! Congratulations, Sarah Fields. You are the winner of today's ebook. So,
Congratulations.
yes, and I will get you the email address after the show to send that along to today's winner. Fabulous. Let's bring us back together here. Yay! We're friends again.
Yay.
Yes. So are you going to make this actually into a series, or are you going to widen this world a little bit? Is there more to come?
So I thought a lot about this. So I've been working on in this world since my early 20s in one way or another. So, and I have a history of trying to do backgrounds and build the world before I do my writing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work out. So I, I basically had a novel idea for a character for a background character. So I started writing his background, and it turned into a novel. So I said, "Wait, I can't do that. That's not what I was trying to do." So then I tried to do another background story for a character, and it's like it's turned into a novel, and I said I want to go with it. And so actually, that's the novel I've been posting on my Patreon for free.
Oh, tell me about that really quick. Yeah, let's hear about that.
So it's starts like a long series of ideas I have for the story of this world, and it starts with a vampire in a prophecy. But it's set in the modern age in Oregon. Actually, it starts in the Bend area.
What is your Patreon channel? Sorry.
It's just think it's just Patreon/Bailnorn.
Okay. Patreon.com. I'm going to put that. I didn't have that in your ticker, so I'm
Oh,
going to put that onto your here into the comments for everybody so they can go check out your Patreon.
yeah, I've released I think 12 parts of it at the moment. It's called Philip Clowes. It has its own tag, so it should be easy to find. I try to release a section every month.
I'm just looking it up to be sure here, but indeed, Baelnorn it is. Yeah. Okay, and I want to remind everybody too, you can actually, if you just scroll down a little bit, you can follow people on Patreon, without actually subscribing, so you can get a taste of things and then
Yeah.
subscribe when when you are comfortable doing the thing, if now isn't the time. But that way you at least are connected and will get the notifications and such of whatever's. So back to Oregon and the story that you post on your Patreon.
Yeah, and so it's really the beginning of the story about magic coming back into the world, and that's where this story is coming along. It's following a major prophecy that will affect this world and another world, and that's where the story begins. And so I just kept making background characters, and it just turned out they were major characters, major characters. So I'm actually the third book is the main quote unquote main character. But they're all characters are going to have take part. And then I decided, if I want to make backgrounds of these characters, I don't have to make novels of each character. I can do short stories.
Yeah.
And so I decided, why not stream the process as well? And so when I write my short stories, which I'm calling short stories, I have a title for them, a series title for them, but an illusion of Miss short story. That's what I'm calling it. And so I write those while on stream so people can interact and we can have discussions about it and stuff like that. And so all of
That's
those, and
cool.
yeah, it's not very common. I know there's some people doing writing stuff, but on Twitch, but it's kind of new-ish.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to get back into that. So yeah, I have larger plans. So I'm going to do a series of short stories in the setting as well as the main novels for the world story.
What were we talking about the other day on Fae News? Like, you're talking about short stories and writing the things, and somehow or another, it had to do with writing fanfic about the Suez Canal, I think. And then somehow that converted into writing little short stories about ourselves via the channel. And so, like, you saying that made me think about that. I'm like, oh, we should have you write short stories about our crazy zany stuff. That would be hilarious and fun. All right, well, everybody, check out, if you will, go check out. I'm going to put it back up here. All the information is in the low bar and the descriptor if you're watching from Facebook. Please go check out Baelnorn's channels. He has 2 YouTube channels, Patreon channel, and of course, Instagram and all of the other regular things, right? So website. You can also find his books on Amazon, and the link to that is in the low bar. It was too long to put into the ticker, so it's in the low bar if you want to go buy his book. If you do, please remember to leave a review. It helps the indie authors enormously if you do that. And with that said, today is...
Oh no, she froze.
Oh no, did I cut out? Okay, here, I'm back. Okay, yeah. Happy Goblinization Day, everybody, because it's Friday and tomorrow is Beltane, so happy Beltane. And hopefully we'll see a bunch of you at Monarch Sculpture Park and then, of course, in Chehalis at the Shire. So with that said, please hit like and subscribe and do all the things. And I will see you guys next Wednesday for Fae News. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hello, friends. This is Gunther Hammerhands. Thank you for checking out Fairy Princess Lolly's channel. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button. Use your troll hammer to ring that little bell icon to get notifications when she posts future videos. And if you'd like to support these magical creations, fly over to our Patreon and join the Fairy family. Safe travels!